Hi, so we're up to chapter 5 of Routing and Switching Essentials, which is switch configuration. So we've done tiny bits in Intro to Networks, but we go into more depth in this one. So we'll look at basic switch configuration. So initial settings like passwords and IP addresses and things like that, and then we'll actually go into a little more depth into configuring switch ports. And then we're going to look at some security best practices in switches, and so we'll manage virtual interfaces on a switch, and we'll look at port security as well. So, initial configuration. So basically a switch, again, is just a specialised computer with a specialised operating system and hardware. So like all computers, powers on, does a power on self-test, it's got a bootstrap program, finds an operating system, loads the operating system, then loads the config file, and away we roll, basically. And so there is a boot environmental variable that's set, and if that is not set, the switch looks through Flash to try and find an operating system. It's not always good at doing it, but anyway. And so if it doesn't find an operating system, it goes into the boot ROM. The boot ROM on a switch is not very full featured, but you can set that boot environment variable, so hopefully it will find it if the file is still there, and you can transfer a new operating system onto there, but you actually have to do it via the console port, so it's not very quick, but anyway. Basically that is how you set the boot variable in the switch using iOS. And so boot system, and then look in Flash, and there's in this directory, and this is the file name of the operating system. So the bootloader prompt can be accessed through the console connection on the switch, and so from there you can configure the terminal emulation software, unplug the switch power cord. So basically you need to do a hard reboot like always. You reconnect the power cord at the same time or within 15 seconds, press and hold the mode button, and that will actually get you into that bootloader. And so this process can either be used to resurrect the switch, except if it can't find an operating system, it's the way it's going to go anyway. But you can also use this as at least this process with some extra steps to actually recover from an unknown password as well. And so from there you can actually then manipulate the switch, at least basically, and then get it working hopefully. Okay, so switches have lots of LEDs, and so basically there are system LEDs, and when you hit that mode button, which we spoke about in the previous slide, it will actually change what the LEDs do. And so there is a system LED here, and so that is just basically if it's green, it means it's booted successfully, and away you roll. And of course it will be flashing while it's booting and things like that. And then basically after it's booted, if you hit the mode button, it will actually then go into some different other different modes. You can look at status, duplex speed, and PoE settings. And so as you hit the mode button, it will actually cycle through, and the ports themselves will actually just change what they're displaying. And so yeah, and so basically the port lights, if it's off, there is the port is either shut down or there's no cable in there, and so there's no link present. If it's green, it means there's the link present and it's all up and running. Blinking green means that there's data moving through that port. Alternating green and amber means it's got a link fault. If it's amber, that often means it is actually going through spanning tree protocol, which we'll talk about in CCNA 3. And so if it's blinking, if it's solid, it means it's actually not sending, and then blinking means it's actually trying to prevent a switching loop, is what STP is all about. Okay, so basic switch management, of course, we use the console cable as per standard, and of course the switches we've got do not have a USB port on them, and so the console cable is the only option. So to configure a switch for remote access, the switch must be configured with an IP address, subnet mask and default gateway. That last one is only if you're going to manage from a different subnet. One particular switch virtual interface is used to manage the switch, and so a switched IP address is assigned to the switch virtual interface. By default, the management SVI is VLAN 1. That's already there and set up by default. That's all you need to do. But because everyone knows that VLAN 1 is the management VLAN by default, it's probably a good idea to change it. But so you'll see probably a lot of the labs in this course actually use VLAN 99. Again, that's probably not one I'd use, because that would, if I were a hacker, first one I'd try would be VLAN 1 and second one I'd try would be VLAN 99. But anyway, pick another number. And so, as I said, they use VLAN 99 fairly regularly. And so if you do interface VLAN 99, it will then allows you to put an IP address, you do no shut, and then you give it a default gateway, and away you roll. Of course, you save the settings. So of course, VLAN 99 does need to be a valid VLAN for it to work, but yeah. And so that's, now you can remotely administer that switch from just by using the network as opposed to a console cable. Now, duplex. Of course, you can have full or half duplex. I think we might have mentioned this last time. So full duplex is like most roads in the state, traffic going in both directions at the same time. Half duplex means you can have traffic going in both directions, but only one at a time. And so one direction there and then the other direction next. And so basically, it's a bit like the Southern Expressway used to be about 5-10 years ago, where it was, you know, in the morning you could drive to town, in the evening you could drive from town. Okay, configure switch ports at the physical layer. So some switches have default settings of auto for both duplex and speed, and that should work nicely, but it doesn't always. And so if you have mismatched duplex or speed, it will probably not work at all. And so what you can do is you can check what is the best that they support, and then you can actually manually set the duplex to full and the speed to 100. And so that will, it turns off the auto negotiation, and so as long as both ends can support that, it should work. So fiber ports operate at one speed and are always full duplex. Okay, some switches have the automatic medium dependent interface crossover, or MDIX feature, and so more modern ones. And so if you link two switches together, you don't necessarily need to use a crossover cable, which is what we probably spoke about in introduction to networks. And so, yeah, basically the switches will sense what circuit the other end is using and then adapt automatically. And so you can do MDIX auto as a setting there. Basically, for auto negotiation to work, all of those settings need to be in auto. And so how do you verify it? So you can actually do show controllers, Ethernet controller, and you probably don't have to do this include, but this will only include the auto MDIX, and so it's on, as you can see from there. Okay, so how do we verify switch port configuration? So show interfaces will give you a page per interface with a whole pile of stats and other such things. You can do the show startup config and running config to see what configuration has happened to those ports. Show flash is not going to give you a lot about a port configuration, but it will tell you what's installed in the flash file system. Display system hardware and software status. You can do show version. You can also do show history for what commands have been entered previously. You can do show IP to have a look at the IP information on the interfaces. And of course, it's a switch. So show MAC address table is of course how you see what MAC addresses are on which ports. So it's the equivalent of the routing table on a router. Okay, so show running config, and as you can see here, this switch port is a member of VLAN 99, and it's a switch port mode access. And so what access means is there's only a host plugged into that port. And so if you wanted to have a trunk link between two switches, you would normally have switch port mode trunk as a command in there. And so you can also see that interface VLAN 99 has been configured with that IP address and that mask. And so useful. With the show interfaces, the name of the interface means the physical layer is up, and then line protocol means layer 2 is up, and that's consistent with all types of interfaces. Just what it means can be a little bit different at times. And so you can see that it's full duplex. It's should have the speed in there as well. Bandwidth, there you go, 100,000 kilobits, so of course 100 megabit, and so on. So yeah, you get a lot of information. As I said, it's a page full per interface. You can do show interfaces command and give it the name, and it will basically give that information as well. The second parameter, protocol status, yeah, data link layer, as I said. Now, basically, as long as if you've got a shutdown, of course, these will both be down. If you have a no shut, but there's no cable in it, you'll often have fast Ethernet is up, the line protocol is down. So with Ethernet ports, with serial ports, they behave a little differently. If there's no cable, both are down. But yeah, just because the ports work a little differently between Ethernet and serial ports. And so also when you do that show interfaces command, it gives you some other information as well, like have there been any undersized frames go through or oversized frames, and so how many errors have there been, and so they're all in CRC, you know, the frame check sequence errors. There have been 8 output errors, there have been 1,790 collisions. That's bad. Whether someone's just edited this. And there's also 235 late collisions. This is terrible. So a late collision means it happens after the first 512 bits. If you remember from Introduction to Networks, there's a minimum frame size, and that's 64 bytes, which is, you know, about 512 bits. And so that's where all collisions should start. If there are late collisions, it probably means that there's a really bad and long cable in there that's longer than the standard supports. And so, yes, we've certainly got a problem with this. Okay, so how do we troubleshoot media issues? So do show interfaces. Is the interface up? All cool. So basically, if there are still problems, are there indications of EMI or noise? And so, you know, are there any errors, basically? Verify the duplex setting is properly set. And so if it's all good, great. If it's not up, well then, you know, you've got to check your cables, your connectors, and of course, you know, are your speed and duplex settings good, basically? And have you fixed the problem? Yes, no, basically, yeah, you might have to get someone else to look at it, basically escalating, that's what that means. So switch security. Now, Secure Shell is an alternative protocol to Telnet. So Telnet, while terribly convenient, is not secure. It actually sends its passwords in plain text and usernames and passwords, and so you can intercept it, and it is, yeah, not very good. And so basically you can actually look at the frames and it will tell you, oh, here's the username and here's the password if you use Wireshark. So you know, it's a free tool everyone's got, so yeah, not great. While with SSH, if you can understand that, I'm going to say there's there's some listings of some encryption standards. So there's Diffie-Hellman, and I think I've seen a few others in there that are familiar. There was Blowfish and a few other things like that. So they're all encryption protocols. So yeah, I dare you to get some meaning out of that. So for a switch to work with SSH, it needs to have a K9 in its iOS name, and that means it supports cryptographic communication. And so, yeah, that's the first thing you do. It would normally be in the file name, but if someone's modified the file name, of course it may not be, but if you do a show version, it will actually be in the version of the file. So how do we turn on SSH? Now, SSH needs to have a fully qualified domain name, and so it's already got a host name because it's been called S1, and then you give it a domain name of cisco.com in this instance, and so now it's s1.cisco.com, so it's got a fully qualified domain name. And then you need to create a key pair, and so this is asymmetric encryption, and so you need a public and private key, and so crypto key generate RSA is the way you go with that. How many bits in the modulus? The more the better, but of course the more work it is as well. But anyway, and so of course for SSH to work as well, you need to have a username and password. So most of the time we were just using a password command on the VTY. That's not good enough. You need to have a local database, so login local, and this is your local database. So we've created a user account called admin, and then we've hashed the password of CCNA, and so that's cool. And so you should also configure the VTY lines to actually use only SSH. If you don't do that command, it's actually transport input all, and so we'll accept anything. So if you type in telnet, it will work. And so if you want to stop using telnet, which is a good idea, you do transport input SSH, and that's the only one that it will use. And so from there, and version 2 of SSH is more secure than version 1. There are some flaws in version 1. I don't think version 2 is perfect, but it's better. And so, of course, how do you connect using SSH? On Windows, there isn't a built-in client, so we'll often use PuTTY. And then you just basically type in the switch IP address, select SSH, and then click go. I think it is somewhere. I think they've covered the one. And so then, of course, you will authenticate with admin and CCNA, I think it was. And so from there, you can actually see that someone is logged in. You actually get 2 connections, one for inbound and one for outbound traffic. And so yeah, that's one connection, but of course just both directions. And so more security. So that's secure remote management we've been talking about up until now. Now we're going to talk about how do we secure ports. And so one good first step is any ports that are unused, you should shut them down. That will stop people from able to plug in and get into your network. And then there's another tool called port security. Now, port security limits the number of valid MAC addresses allowed to transmit data through a switch port. If a port has a port security enabled and its unknown MAC address sends data, the switch presents a security violation. So the default number of secure MAC addresses allowed is 1. And so there are several ways you can actually configure what is a valid MAC address. And so basically, you can do it statically, so you can actually do the command switch port security MAC address, and you supply the MAC address. That's all cool. You can just let it dynamically learn one MAC address and be happy, but that won't stay. Of course, this will be stuck in your configuration if you save it, and it will be permanent. This one will not. And then there's this one called sticky, and so you can do switch port security MAC address sticky. And so basically the first MAC address that switch learns will actually be then put into the configuration. And so that will be permanent. And if you, after a while, after it's learned all of its MAC addresses, if you do a copy run start, it will then save it into your startup config. So if the switch reboots, it will become permanent as well. So dynamic, after 5 minutes, if someone's turned off and then someone else plugs in, they will be able to connect. And so the sticky is sort of a good, easy to go way, a lot easier than you knowing every MAC address and typing them all in, which sounds like a bit of a pain to me. Okay, so there are actually violation modes. In other words, what the switch will do when when it has a violation, as in too many MAC addresses. And so there's protect, restrict, and shut down. So protect, data from an unknown source MAC address is dropped and the security notification is not presented by the switch. And so basically it just blocks that MAC address and does nothing else. With restrict, it blocks that MAC address, but it also sends a security notification. And so it warns people saying, hey, there's an unauthorized MAC address trying to access the network. And then the last and default mode is actually shut down. And so as soon as there's a violation, that whole port's just shut down. And so you actually have to shut down and then no shutdown to bring that port back up. And so, yes, it is a... yeah, so 3 ways you can go. You can just block the extra MAC address, you can block the MAC address and notify, or you can just block that entire port. Okay, so port security is not on by default. You need to turn it on. The default number of MAC addresses is 1. The default violation mode is shut down, and it doesn't do stick address learning by default. So how do we configure this? So you go to interface, fast Ethernet 018 in this example, and then you put it into access mode. And so you wouldn't do this on a trunk port because it's going to have lots of MAC addresses against it. So you only do this on an access port. And then you do switch port security. Now, the other commands to change the default settings of it are switch port security, something else. And so, as this slide says, and I've seen it myself, so many people this is what turns on port security. If you don't do this plain command by itself, it doesn't actually turn it on. So you may have configured how it will behave, but you actually haven't turned it on if you do those other things. And so you've got to turn it on. And so here there are some configurations, and so we've done switch port security maximum 10. That's generous. And then switch port security MAC address sticky, and so it will learn those 10 MAC addresses and won't accept any others. So that's the way they've gone. Now, of course, if you're doing if you're doing virtual machines on a computer with a bridged interface, that will upset port security if it's set to a maximum of 1. It will block the other ports or even shut down the port. So, so if that's something you do, you might want to add to the MAC address count. So that might be why this one's up to 10. But having sticky for it is quite possibly a bad idea, because you might run all kinds of VMs and eventually you're going to run out of 10 MAC addresses. So anyway, so how do we verify it? So show port security interface command. And so from there, of course, you tell it which interface. You can see here that port 18 has got a maximum number of MAC addresses as 1. Port security is enabled. It's secure and up. Violation mode is shut down. Aging time 0. Aging type absolute. So and so it's got 1 MAC address. That's it, and away you roll. Here is port 19. Port security is enabled, it's secure up, violation is shut down. So far no differences, but they've set the maximum to 10. There's only been 1 MAC address at the moment, and that's it. So you can't, it's not all that hard to verify. So you can do show running config, and if you've done that MAC address sticky, this is the command that you would have typed in, and then once it's learnt a MAC address, it will actually automatically throw in this extra line. So this is the sticky one that it's learnt. And so that's only in the running config once it's learnt it. But if you do copy run start, that will then also be saved in the startup config. And so that will make it permanent. So that may or may not be desirable, but it's certainly a good idea. Well, at least should be considered. Now, show port security address. And so basically here it will shows you that have been what MAC addresses have been learnt on what ports, and so they all belong with VLAN 1, and so there's a secure dynamic and a secure sticky here. So yeah, very nice. And so if it has had an error, this is the message you'll get, and the interface has changed state down. So this is in that shutdown default mode. And so as I said, you'd have to shut down no shut to actually get the port back online again. Let's see, if you do show interface F18 status, it will say error disabled. And so, yeah. Do not re-enable the port until the security threat is investigated and eliminated. So don't just do a shutdown, no shutdown. So you should actually investigate what is plugged in and if that's valid or not. Okay, so that's it for the chapter. And so we've looked at basic switch configuration, and we've looked at some security best practices, including SSH and port security. So there's the logo. So the next chapter is chapter 6, and that's all about VLANs. So I'll see you then.